This is a response video. I don't particularly like this format. I find it more elegant to build original content rather than commenting on others' work. However, a recent Linux versus Windows comparison video has raised issues that deserve deeper analysis. This isn't about defending a platform at all costs, but examining how certain narratives are constructed through subtle yet effective communication techniques. Bias isn't always evident. It passes through lexical choices, argumentative sequences, implicit assumptions that sound like objective judgments but profoundly condition. Please, don't go vandalize other channels. If you want to express yourselves, demonstrate the lucidity that should characterize our community. Let's analyze point by point the 9 proposed categories. Ferry says literally, with Windows installation is very simple, strategically omitting that Windows is pre-installed on 99% of computers sold. This isn't a detail, it's the heart of the matter. We're not comparing installation, we're comparing reinstallation of an already present system with ex novo installation of another. The manipulation continues. Linux compared to the past has made enormous steps forward. Notice the construction? It automatically places Linux in a catching-up position, as if Windows were the natural benchmark to reach. But Ferry, what enormous steps forward has Windows made in installation in recent years? He concludes saying the systems are equivalent in installation, assigning 10 to both. But are they really equivalent? Can you install Windows on a USB stick and run it in 20 megabytes? Have you ever tried installing Windows in dual boot? Windows systematically overwrites the bootloader, preventing access to other operating systems. Linux offers incomparable flexibility, graphical, textual, automated, customized installers, hundreds of distributions for every need. Saying they are equivalent is intellectually dishonest. On this point, honesty is mandatory. Linux still suffers some disadvantages, mainly due to NVIDIA's policies. However, open drivers allow a functioning system, and most manufacturers release drivers for Linux. We're in 2025. The difference is minimal and rapidly disappearing. The attribution of similar votes, Windows 10, Linux 8, reflects this reality. Here emerges the most pervasive bias, the implicit benchmark. It's taken for granted that the judgment metric should be Windows, when we should consider operating systems in the hands of neutral users. A beginner with Linux Mint wouldn't encounter more difficulties than one with Windows. Actually, probably less, given the absence of bloatware and integrated advertising. The communicative subtlety reaches its peak when it said, Linux also has stores for installing programs. Really? I didn't know Windows had invented software repositories. Centralized package management has existed on Linux for decades, long before Microsoft thought of its store. It's Linux that inspired this functionality, not the other way around. Ferry admits that Linux is unbeatable in customization, then adds that this customization requires creating a nice experience. So Ferry, do I need to know the terminal to install a KDE theme, change icons, or set a wallpaper? This narrative wants to paint Linux as difficult at all costs, applying the complexity myth precisely to its greatest strength. It's a clever communication technique. Give a clearly better vote, Linux 10, Windows 5, while discrediting the category itself. But the real problem is the implicit final message. Linux isn't yet up to Windows level. Ferry, you could have said it more eloquently. There are people online who can read certain messages. Ferry says, Linux is generally considered more secure, then adds, today the main attacks are phishing ones. If a gullible user clicks on that email link, in this case, Linux doesn't defend more than what Windows can do. Ferry, let me be direct. Your knowledge of Linux systems isn't sufficiently deep to treat this topic. The concept of security on Linux is much deeper, and it's not true that it's more secure than Windows. More secure compared to what, in which context, and in whose hands. It's potentially more secure, you see. Everything changes based on the point of view. For 20 years, every Linux discussion gets stuck on "there's no Photoshop." It's become an intellectual joke. Are we evaluating an ecosystem of millions of lines of code for the absence of a single commercial program? The world has changed. People want simple, light, fast tools. Software that doesn't require 20 gigabytes, that doesn't compulsively update breaking the interface, that doesn't impose monthly subscriptions. For professional graphics, they use Affinity, Figma, Canva, artificial intelligence tools. Linux represents a different idea. Blender is a world reference in 3D animation. Kdenlive is powerful and fluid. Krita and Inkscape are mature and respected. Linux file managers, Nemo, Thunar, Dolphin are superior. You use them and don't go back. In scientific research, Linux is the standard. Supercomputers, laboratories, space agencies. With Octave, SciPy, SageMath, QGIS, Windows is an opaque container, designed to sell, not to understand. Ferry declares, Linux is known for requiring much fewer resources, but then adds, if you have a modern PC though, despite these differences persisting, actually they don't reflect so visibly on daily experience. Ferry, this is pure disinformation. The differences in resource consumption are significant and always impact user experience. Faster boot, greater responsiveness, more RAM available for applications, longer battery life on laptops. The implicit message is always the same. If you have to switch to Linux for this, don't do it. Yet you assign 10 to Linux and 6 to Windows. Your advice doesn't reflect the votes you give, Ferry. It's true. In certain consumer contexts, Windows maintains performance advantages, especially in video rendering and operations that exploit libraries optimized for modern hardware. This happens because it's the dominant platform and manufacturers optimize where the majority is. But Linux doesn't start from the same level of commercial advantage, yet excels in transparency, stability, flexibility. The future isn't made of passive users who click and wait. The future is control, efficiency, personalization. Linux offers freedom, Windows offers shortcuts. On gaming, yes, many titles are developed for Windows, but Linux is holding the comparison with open-source compatibility systems written by volunteers without access to source code. Steam Deck, based on Arch Linux and Proton, demonstrates that the future of gaming can be open source. Specific distributions like Nobara exist that offer experiences close to Windows. There's not much to say here. 0 points to Windows, 10 to Linux. Freedom from license costs is evident. Here's where Ferry shows his true intentions. The total votes give Linux winning 83 to 74. But then he says, I'd like to give another metric. Obviously, the cost part heavily affects this score. So what do, Ferry? You exclude the cost category because it's not so important and relevant, magically making Windows pass to advantage 69 to 63. This, Ferry, is pure manipulation. You built the entire video to reach this moment. Discredit Linux's victory by finding an excuse to exclude the category where Windows gets 0. Your final sentence is revealing. The obligatory passage from Windows to Linux, if there aren't specific necessities. It's a matter of personal choice, of willingness to embrace open source, but there's no objective feedback. Ferry, your video wasn't objective at all. It was one of the most subtle pieces of anti-Linux propaganda I've ever seen. And for this, you forced me to waste my Friday afternoon responding to you. I'm not objective. I'm a Linux user for 20 years. I adore open source, yet I maintain critical spirit. I don't proselytize. It should be a free, individual, conscious choice. I don't believe a video created by me on Windows-Linux differences has any credibility where, pretending to seem objective, I implicitly recommend switching to Linux. This is hypocrisy. I'm a Linux YouTuber, and I talk about Linux and the commercial and political abuses perpetrated in the last 20 years by proprietary systems. For me, Windows could even compress a file at light speed, but since it does the same with my freedom, my privacy, and my right to choice, I support Linux. There are sectors where Windows excels, others where Linux dominates. But there are incontrovertible data. Linux is freedom. The freedom to do what you want, how you want it, when you want it. It has hundreds of thousands of professional programs, runs on everything, went to Mars, is everywhere in critical technologies. The differences discussed in these videos are marginal. What matters is your freedom. Freedom over your hardware, its durability, control of your data. Ironically, I hate Linux versus Windows videos, yet I made one. But simply because I detest real propaganda and people's manipulation. Remember that things are never as simple as they're told. Never trust anyone who claims to tell you the truth. I can, as an experiment, make a video where I openly denigrate one distribution compared to another if I want. Absolute objectivity doesn't exist, especially on such divisive topics, and I'm intellectually honest in admitting it. Even if I try extremely to zero out my biases, my convictions, my cultural filters, it's natural that my background, my experiences, my knowledge have an effect on what I say. That said, Linux versus Windows is a much more complex topic and would require technically much more advanced discussions compared to these neighborhood bar chatter. It's undoubtable that Linux offers innumerable advantages from all points of view. But it always depends on what you're looking for in an operating system. Actually, it's not just an operating system. It's a way of seeing technology and relating to it. Whether it's more or less usable, more or less secure, more or less performant, well, it changes little. Don't you think? Fairy, I'm not attacking your arguments. Whether Windows is more usable than Linux or not is a relative point, and neither you nor I have the tools to draw an absolute conclusion. But the problem isn't what you say, it's how you say it. You pretend to be objective, super partes, while painting Linux in a subtle and systematic way as inferior. You don't put yourself in the shoes of what you are, a Windows user with your experience and your prejudices. And this I detest. I instead am a Linux user, and I say it clearly. I have my biases, my doubts about the lucidity with which I could judge Windows, but at least I admit it. I don't pretend to be a neutral and superior voice. Here's the real difference between us.